Okay. Go.
All right, we're good. Okay, fine. All right. So the last couple shiurim we were discussing the destiny of Kal Yisrael. Again, Olam Haba. What Olam Haba means. So we discussed the approach of the Rambam and the approach of all the philosophers that go with the approach of the Rambam, and then we discussed the approach of the Mekubalim, headed by the Ramban. That the destiny of Kal Yisrael, and again, like I said, this is the approach that has been accepted by the Jewish people as being the approach that we're all hoping for, which is that the destiny of Klal Yisrael is Tchias HaMesim. That Olam Haba means the resurrection of the dead, that when a person lives his lifetime, does all the mitzvahs he can, but at some point when the person passes away, the neshama goes, like just to repeat quickly, the neshama goes to a place called Olam HaNeshama, it's the world of souls, or another term for it is Gan Eden, and the body is obviously buried and broken down. And both body and soul have to go through certain things in order for them to be able to get to the level where they're able to reach in Tchias HaMesim. The body is broken down and is waiting to be reconstituted in a more refined way, in a way that's similar to Adam Rishon before the sin. And the neshama in Gan Eden is also going through a therapeutic experience of rediscovering its own qualities, rediscovering its own potential, and so on. So I think today I think a good idea would be to discuss is this destiny, is this future of Olam Haba something that every single Jew is guaranteed? Is this something that every single Jew can look forward to? Or is it possible, God forbid, to lose one portion in Olam Haba? So right off the bat, just to explain a little bit, there's no question that even within Jewish people that will have Olam Haba, God willing, there's no question that the process will be quicker and more easily, and it'll happen easily for the greater the tzaddik. So, for example, a person that never sinned. The Gemara says, for example, there were 4 people in our history that never sinned at all. They never did any avera. So, for such a person on that level, there's no question that his process of getting to Gan Eden, of getting to Olam Haba, getting to the resurrection of the dead, is relatively easy. Even for those people, their bodies have to be broken down, their body has to be reconstituted, and their neshama also has to go through this therapeutic experience of rediscovering its own power and its own qualities in Gan Eden. There's no question that even a person that never sinned has to go through that. However, but if you never sinned at all, that's all the person has to go through, and the process is relatively simple. The more a person sins, God forbid, the more problems the person has spiritually, then the more difficult the road is for his body, and the more difficult the road is for his neshama. The more, let's say, for example, the Storm discussed that averos that have to do with physical pleasure. A person that, God forbid, eats non-kosher food and so on. That makes the process of the rebuilding of the body for Tchias HaMesim all the more difficult. Like I said, every single body that we have today in this world is not fit for Tchias HaMesim. It has to be rebuilt. But the more refined the body is, the more holy the person is in this lifetime, the more meticulous he is in his adherence to mitzvahs, specifically related to the body, the easier that process is going to be. The more sins a person commits with his body, the more difficult and arduous a journey that journey is going to be to get the body to where it needs to be. And the same thing with the neshama. The more refined the neshama is, the more pure the neshama remains in this lifetime, the less therapy, so to speak, or the less healing it has to go through in Shemayim. The more difficulties a person brings upon himself, the more of a journey the neshama is going to have to go through in order to get where it needs to be able to get in order to come back for Tchias HaMesim. So, and again, a part of that process is Gehenna. Unfortunately, for many people, if a person does sin, then there is a process that's called Gehenna, which is a place that Hashem created that is somewhat of like a dishwasher or a washing machine for the neshama. It's not a punishment that a Jew sits in forever. That's a place for the purging of impurities from the neshama. And once the neshama is purged from its impurities of this world, then it's able to then go in Gan Eden and again rediscover its own positive qualities. But now the question is going to be, what about those people that are really big Rishayim? Is it possible for someone to be so wicked and so evil to actually lose his portion in Olam Haba? So we all know the famous Mishnah in Sanhedrin, the opening line, Kol Yisrael yesh lam chelek l'Olam Haba, that thankfully all Jews seem to have a portion of the world to come. That's a very happy line, very, very uplifting. However, the immediate following line in the Mishnah is Ve'elu she'ein lem chelik olam haba, and these are the Jews that don't have a portion of World to Come. And the Mishnah then continues to list certain sins that a person can commit to seemingly lose his portion of World to Come. A person, for example, that doesn't believe in Hashem, a person doesn't believe in Tchias HaMesim, a person that doesn't believe in Torah Min HaShamayim, all the basic principles of faith that we take, that we believe in, that we're willing to die for. If a person does not believe in these things, the Mishnah seems to say you lose your portion of World to Come. So from that Mishnah, from the simple reading of that Mishnah, and and this is the opinion of some, is that it is a possibility, Chas v'Shalom, it's a possibility for a Jew to lose his portion of World to Come. However, this is what I want to talk about today very, very quickly, is that this is not the opinion of the Mekubalim. According to the Mekubalim, again, throughout every single generation, and as we're going to see in a second, this is rooted in Chazal themselves, that it's actually impossible for a Jew to lose completely his portion in Olam Haba. It's actually absolutely impossible. Let me give a little bit of a background. The Gemara, even though the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin that, if a person commits these sins, a person, denies these truths, you can lose your portion in the world to come. There is a line in the Gemara over there, a few dafim later, and a very cryptic statement. The Gemara says that despite the fact that the Mishnah says what it says, Darshei Rishumais Amru. Darshei Rishumais means those that are able to pick up on hints. Those that are able to pick up on hints say that despite what the Mishnah says, Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chelik Olam Haba, all Jews have a portion of world to come. That's what the Gemara says. And what doesn't clarify what exactly that means and how does that work? We know that there's a general rule in Halacha that you can't just disagree with the Mishnah, right? The Mishnah says what it says for a reason. You can't just disagree with it. So what exactly does that mean? So this is where all the Mekubalim chime in, and they all give basically, there are variations here and there, but the basic approach by the Mekubalim, starting with the Maharal, the Ramchal talks about this, the Ramami Panu talked about this, the Arizal talked about this. All the Mekubalim discuss the following thing, and they say as follows. Darshei Rishumos, these people that are able to pick up on hints, who are these people? So the Mekubalim said that those Darshei Rishumos, those people they were the Mekubalim during Chazal. When Chazal described Mekubalim, we call them Mekubalim, Chazal described them as Darshei Rishumos, those people that are able to pick up on subtleties, those people that are able to pick up on hints. And what that means is as follows. Despite the fact, let me give a little bit of background to explain what the Mekubalim say. The Ramchal, in a number of his Sarim, says the following thing. He says that Hashem has two relationships with the Jewish people. One relationship Hashem has with us is called Hanhagas HaMishpat, which means a way of judgment, a way of justice. We all know, Midah Keneged Midah, right? That if a person does a mitzvah, you get reward. If a person does Averis, God forbid, you get the opposite. Hashem acts with us according to what we deserve. There's such a thing as called free will, and we use our free will in a positive way, we'll get benefits. If we use our free will in a negative way, then we don't get benefits, and that's the way it works. That's called Hanhagas HaMishpat, the way Hashem reacts in this world through judgment. However, says Ramchal is a very, very, very important point. Ramchal says that there's another relationship that Hashem has with the Jewish people in particular, which is called Hanogas Hayichud, which means a way of a relationship that's called a way in a relationship of unification, of unity, which means as follows. The Ramchal explains that Hashem's love for the Jewish people, and more than that, Hashem's connection with the Jewish people is so deep and so profound and so a part of himself, so to speak, is that even though we have free will and there is within our ability of making decisions in our lives to deserve punishment or to deserve reward, because of Hashem's love for us and because of Hashem's relationship with us, there is a border to free will. There is a limit to where Hashem is going to allow us to go. So, for example, if a person's, let's say, there's a swimming pool, for example, and you can have free range. You could swim wherever you want, but only, in the shallow end. When you get to the deep end, that area is off limits. There is a certain misgaris, there's a certain border to where free will is allowed. And if Hashem sees that our free will, we're using our free will to such an extent where our destiny, where our portion of the world to come is becoming now becoming questioned, right? If we're sinning so greatly or we're veering off the path so much, where we're getting close to the possibility of losing our portion of what's to come according to judgment, Then Hashem's other relationship of unification comes in, and behind the scenes, some way, say the Mekubalim, some way, whether it's through punishment, whether it's through inspiration of tshuva, whatever it is, Hashem will work it out in such a way where every single Jew will never ever be able to use his free will to actually lose his portion of world to come completely. So when the Mishnah says in Sanhedrin that these are sins where a person can commit to lose his portion, theoretically that's true. But the Darash Rishumas, those people that are able to pick up on subtleties, meaning the Mekubalim, what they tell us is that Hashem will never allow that to completely happen. How does it work? What will Hashem do in order to make a person who is a terrible Rasha get a portion of the world to come? So Hashem has his ways. Again, whether it be through punishments in this world, whether it be through punishments in the next world, whether it be through reincarnation, whether it be through inspiring the person to do tshuva on his deathbed. Whatever it might be, there are many, many different ways for Hashem to use. But Hashem will ultimately, swoop in last minute to make sure that there's never a Jew that's ever lost. And it's famously said by the Arizal. The Arizal, in fact, said that even Yoshka, right? Even Jesus, who probably goes down in history as one of the worst Jews of all time, definitely in the top 10. He's definitely up there and one of the worst Jews of all time. The Arizal taught that even he has a portion of world to come, ultimately. He's a Jew, and he'll have a portion of world to come. The Arizal said he'll have to be in Gehenna for 50,000 yoivels. The yovel's 50 years. So 50,000 yoivels, he'll have to be in Gehenna to fix his neshama. But once that time period is over and he goes through what he has to go through for his tikkun, for his rectification, if he's a Jew, he has a portion of world to come. So this is something that's very, very important, and the Mekubalim stresses very, very much, that it's not possible for a Jew to really, in practical terms, lose his portion of world to come. It's very, there's no question we can use our free will to push off our experience in the world to come very, very far. Like Yoshka, it's going to be after 50,000 yovel, but it's not possible for us to use our free will to completely cut ourselves off. And the reason for this is, as all the Mekubalim explained, that the neshama of a Jew is a chelik elokam imal. It's a piece of the divine presence. It's a piece of Hashem, so to speak. And just like Hashem is forever, so every Jew is forever. And the only thing we can do with our free will is to add layers and to distance ourselves from ourselves. That's really all that we can do, distance ourselves from our neshama. But ultimately speaking, the love of Hashem and the nature of the neshama is such, is that free will has its limits. And there's only so far we can use our free will. And therefore we could do with our free will, we could hasten our ability to connect with Olam Haba. We could become a tzaddik where the process of fixing the body and fixing our neshama after death is very easy. Or we could use our free will in the opposite way and make that journey very, very difficult for ourselves. But ultimately speaking, because we're a Jew, if you're born Jewish or whether you convert, if you have the soul of a Jew inside of you, then that soul is not possible for it to be destroyed. And ultimately speaking, everything returns to its source. And all Jews will have a portion in Tchias HaMesim. And again, it's a question of how quickly and how easily that process is going to be. But that's the promise of Kol Yisrael Yeshem Chelik L'Olam Haba, that despite everything that a Jew can possibly do to himself, Hashem will always swoop in through that way that's above mishpah, that's above judgment, that's a way of love, a way of unification. Hashem will always swoop in to fix the problem. And again, there's many different ways the Mekubalim talk about it. It could be reincarnation, it could be through tshuva, that's preferable. It could be through suffering in this world and the next. But Hashem will always find a way to find the tikkun. And this is something that's very, very important because, again, this is the idea. And again, it has to do with the fact that the Mekubalim will explain that the portion that a Jew has in Olam Haba is not based on his intellect. It's not based on his personality traits. It's based on his neshama. And if the neshama is forever, then a Jew can never lose that portion of the world to come either, because the neshama is part of Hashem, and Hashem is forever, and therefore the question is just getting to that, tapping into that part of ourselves as easily and as quickly as possible. That's as most as we can do, is distance ourselves from our neshama for only so far. But ultimately Hashem will swoop in and call Yisrael Yeshem Chelik L'Olam Haba. So I guess maybe we'll stop with this and we'll open up for some questions.
Yeah, so one question that we got was whether this applies to non-Jews as well, or what degree it applies to non-Jews.
Yeah, okay. So the question with non-Jews in Olam Haba is a very, very good one. It's actually discussed in the Gemara. The Gemara discusses this, whether non-Jews have a portion of world to come. The way it's explained is as follows. There is an idea that Goyim have a portion in Olam Haba, and that's called, if a person falls under the category of Chasidei Umas Olam. Chasidei Umas Olam. What does it mean to be Chasidei Umas Olam? So, simply, it means someone who kept the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. If a guy keeps the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, he keeps the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, he does everything that a good guy is supposed to do, then he will have a portion in Olam Haba. But to clarify this point, we have to discuss what does it mean to keep 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. The average guy in the street never killed anyone. The average guy in the street doesn't steal. The average guy in the street doesn't curse God, doesn't eat live animals. So the truth is, if you think about it, it's only the average guy in the street, by default, just by being a decent human being, obeys the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Is that enough? Is that called keeping the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach? So the truth is, it's not so simple. It's not so simple. The Rambam in Hilchos Malachim, when he discusses these halachas of Goyim and the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, the Rambam says very interesting. The Rambam writes that to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach means that a guy has to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach as it's commanded to them through Moshe Rabbeinu. What the Rambam is telling us is that if a guy just goes through his life and just doesn't steal because that's just the way he is, he's not a thief, and he doesn't kill just because he's not a murderer and he's a decent human being, Hashem will always pays back reward. There's no question. Any good thing a person ever does, Jew, not Jew, Hashem will always reward that. There's no question. But as far as reaching the level to be considered Chasidei Umas Ha'olam, even a guy that technically does not violate the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, it's not enough. He has to commit to keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach as it's part of the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu. In other words, since Olam Haba is something that's uniquely a Jewish experience, the only way how a guy could tap into that is via the Jewish people, through his connection to the Jewish people. Even if he doesn't convert, if he keeps the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach because that's part of the Torah of the Jewish people, that's also a way how he can connect to Olam Haba. In other words, Olam Haba is specifically a Jewish experience, and it's connected with the Jewish neshama. And again, because of the nature of the Jewish neshama, it's part of Hashem. A guy can taste that only by way of him connecting to the Jewish people. So, for example, if you have a guy that never steals, never kills, never curses God, and so on, officially keeps the list of 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, but he's an anti-Semite, you know what I mean? Then that's not going to be a guy that's going to have a portion of the world to come. Hashem will give him reward. There's no question Hashem will give him reward, but as far as actually having Olam Haba, it's not possible to have Olam Haba unless you're having it through the Jewish people, either as a Jew or as a guy that's connecting himself to the Jewish people through his adherence of the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach as is commanded through Moshe Rabbeinu. So if you keep 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, but you're an anti-Semite, it's not going to work. So Olam Haba it's possible for a guy to have Olam Haba, but again, it has to be through the Jewish people. That's number one. Number two, even when a guy has Olam Haba, the Mekubalim also discussed this, the level of dveikus that he's going to have to experience in Olam Haba is not. It's not going to be. It's nowhere near the level that a Jew is going to experience. Again, it's going to be through the Jewish people. It's going to be via the Jewish people, but it's not going to be on that level itself. And as time goes on, I mentioned this earlier on, that Tchias Mason is the beginning of a long time in history. It goes on forever. As time goes on, and as the world raises from level to level to level in its attachment to Hashem, then the situation of Goyim and Olam Haba will change as well. But at least in its initial onset, Goyim will have a portion of Olam Haba, but only through their connection to the Jewish people. That's a very, very important point. But a guy on his own, cannot experience Olam Haba on his own. It has to be through the Jewish people. Okay.
I have a follow-up question, but let's unmute and see if anybody on the phone has a question. Does anybody else have a question? You can speak now. No. Okay. So the follow-up question was, what about, let's say you have a guy who was he was one of the ones, Schindler's List, but he didn't technically keep the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Maybe he did steal, maybe he did something that set him apart.
Yeah. So thankfully, I'm not the one that has to make such a decision, and use any of us. There's no question, and there's no question that such a guy who shows such a mesirus nefesh to save the Jewish people, to love the Jewish people, there's no question that Hashem will work it out. And again, I don't know. You have to be Hashem himself to know exactly, how he's going to deal with this particular guy individually. I don't know. But generally speaking, all I can tell you is what the Swarm say is that the way how a guy can have Olam Haba is through his connection to the Jewish people. Obviously, like keeping 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach as part of the Torah of Moshe Rabbeinu, that's one way. But there's no question by loving the Jewish people, by helping the Jewish people, by saving Jewish lives, there's no question that definitely there's no greater way to attach oneself to the Jewish people than by saving Jews. There's no question about that. So again, in particular, how does that work? How is Hashem going to work it out? If a Jew who saves Jewish lives but technically stole, Hashem will work it out. I don't know. But there's no question that in concept, such a guy, there's no question he is connecting himself to the Jewish people by his actions.
Okay, so if there's any other questions, speak now, or we'll conclude this conference call and pick it up again next week. Anybody else? Okay.
Okay, very good.
Hashem next week.
All right, thank you very much. Bye-bye.